What if the only way to survive was to follow rules you don't understand? When Marlene Quinn accepts a job in a remote forest tower, she thinks she's escaping her haunted past. But the forest hides more than towering pines and silent nights. It holds ancient rules, and breaking them means death. As each rule unravels, Marlene discovers horrifying secrets about missing predecessors, sinister apparitions, and the twisted truth behind the one who watches from the shadow. This isn't just a fight for survival. It's a trap where every decision can lead to her doom. Welcome to the 11th Rule. The first time I heard about the job was through a blurry online posting. Fire lookout wanted, no experience necessary. Room and board provided. At that point, I didn't have much left to lose. The divorce was finalized 2 months ago. My ex-wife kept the house, the dog, even the stupid collection of ceramic frogs she claimed were sentimental. My friends? Most of them drifted off as soon as the paperwork was signed, like they were allergic to failure. No kids, no close family. Just me, 35, broke, and running from the deafening emptiness that filled every room I tried to call home. That's how I ended up applying for jobs I had no business applying for. Coffee shops, gas stations, overnight cleaning crews. Hell, I even filled out an application to be a mascot for a minor league baseball team. But the fire lookout listing, that one caught my eye. The job required someone to live alone in a tower deep in the Black Pine Hollow National Forest, Montana, for the entire summer season. Roughly 3 months. Watch for fires. Report any illegal campers. Keep a log. Basic upkeep of the tower. The posting didn't mention much else, and I didn't care to ask. Mark, the regional supervisor, called me within 24 hours. "We'll start tomorrow," he said flatly. His voice was as dry and coarse as sandpaper. "The tower's already stocked. You'll be alone up there until the end of August. Food deliveries come weekly, weather permitting. Radio contact only. Pay $600, 0 cents a week. Take it or leave it." I took it. The next morning, I drove 8 hours across state lines, my car wheezing like it was on its last breath, until I reached the designated drop-off point. From there, it was a 4-mile hike through dense forest to reach Tower 7. Mark wasn't there to meet me. Instead, he left a laminated map inside a rusted lockbox chained to a crooked fence post. "Follow the markers. No cell signal past this point. Stick to the trail itself was narrower than I expected, more like an animal path than an official trail. Trees pressed in on either side, and the thick canopy above filtered the morning sunlight into fractured beams. Despite the early hour, the air was cool, unnaturally cool for mid-June, and filled with the sharp scent of pine sap and damp soil. I kept walking. For the first time in months, my mind felt oddly still. The suffocating pressure of my failed marriage, my financial ruin, the gut-churning anxiety. They faded into the background. Out here, there was nothing but trees, dirt, and distance. By noon, the tower finally appeared ahead of me. It was taller than I imagined, easily towering 30 meters into the air, supported by 4 steel-reinforced wooden beams. A spiral staircase wrapped around the beams like a metal snake, leading up to a small wooden cabin perched at the very top. 2 storage sheds sat adjacent to the tower's base, their doors secured with heavy-duty padlocks. I stood at the base for several minutes, craning my neck to take it all in. This was it, my new home. Climbing the staircase was more exhausting than I anticipated. My thighs burned halfway up, but the view from the top made it worth it. The cabin's interior was modest but functional. A single bed against the far wall, a weathered desk with an oversized topographical map pinned above it, a large fixed-base radio, a handheld shortwave unit, a battered pair of binoculars, a toolbox, a lantern, a flashlight, and stacks of old fire-logged books. 2 wide windows flanked the cabin, giving me an unobstructed view of the endless sea of forest in every direction. The silence was absolute. I dropped my backpack and exhaled deeply. It wasn't peace exactly, but it was quiet, and that was enough. Mark had left a small note taped to the radio. "Contact Tower 3 once you've arrived. Allison will orient you." After fumbling with the dials, I finally found the correct frequency. Tower 3, this is Tower 7. New arrival here. Over. Static crackled for a moment. Then a woman's voice cut through, warm and clear despite the interference. Hey there, you must be Oscar. Welcome to Black Pine. I've been watching your section while you were on the trip. Her casual tone made me feel oddly at ease. Yeah, thanks. Made it up here in one piece, I replied. Mark said you give me the rundown. Absolutely. Pretty simple stuff, Allison continued. Keep the fire logs updated. Report any smoke columns, lightning strikes, or unauthorized campers. The supply runs happen every Friday, usually handled by Mark or his son. She paused briefly. Oh, and if you haven't already, you'll want to read through the handbook on the desk. It covers everything you need to know about daily operations and some other stuff. I glanced at the thick binder resting under the radio. Got it. I'll go through it and reach out if I have any questions. Sounds good. And Oscar, if you hear or see anything weird, trust your gut. This forest has its quirks. Before I could ask what she meant, the radio clicked off. I frowned, but let it go. Small town superstition, I assumed. The handbook was standard government-issued fare, fire prevention protocols, emergency evacuation procedures, contact frequencies, and an entire section on weather logging. Most of it was dry as dust, until something fell out from the middle of the binder. It was a folded sheet of lined paper, worn thin at the edges and written in frantic, scrawled handwriting. Oid the Laughing Widow. Rules to stay alive. I stared at it, my pulse quickening as I read through the list. There were 9 rules in total, each one more bizarre and unsettling than the last. Rule 1. If you see a woman smiling uncontrollably in the woods, do not approach. Do not acknowledge her. Return to the tower immediately. Rule 2. If any voice comes through the radio that isn't from Tower 3, do not respond. Rule 3. If you hear crying between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., ignore it. Rule 4. Always keep the lantern on while you sleep. If it flickers, turn on the main floodlight immediately. Rule 5. If you hear footsteps on the stairs at night, turn on the floodlight. If you wait too long, it's already too late. Rule 6. If you wake and see a shadow watching you through the window, stay still under the covers. Do not breathe. Rule 7. If you hear scratching anywhere, even near the outhouse, turn off all radios and hide until it stops. Rule 8. If you investigate an abandoned camp and hear a scream, run. Rule 9. If someone is inside the tower when you return, run. And don't stop. Never look back. I stared at the list for a long time, struggling to decide if this was some elaborate joke, a cruel hazing ritual, or something far more sinister. The words at the bottom chilled me more than the rules themselves. Harvey made it 1 year. Rick lasted 1 week. You're next. The first night in the tower was eerily calm, though sleep didn't come easily. The forest was a living, breathing thing out there. Creaking trees, distant rustles, the occasional hoot of an owl slicing through the otherwise heavy silence. Every little noise gnawed at my nerves, amplified by the fact that I was utterly alone. No neighbors, no passing headlights, no background hum of a city. Just me. And that damn list sitting on my desk. I tried not to think about it. Tried telling myself it was some leftover prank by a former lookout, maybe this Harvey or Rick. Maybe some dark humor only people in isolated jobs would find funny. But the more I repeated that to myself, the less convincing it sounded. The wind picked up around midnight, making the wooden beams groan and the cabin's thin metal roof rattled slightly. The lantern beside my bed cast a steady, warm glow. I checked it multiple times before finally lying back down. Eyes fixed on the ceiling, my stomach knotted with something that felt suspiciously like dread. At some point, I don't remember exactly when, I must have drifted off. The scratching woke me. It started faint at first, soft enough that I thought I'd imagined it. Like fingernails brushing lightly against wood. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to hear through the quiet. The noise came again, a little louder this time. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I reached over, immediately shutting off the radio and the handheld unit, just like Rule 7 had instructed. The list had been etched into my mind all day, whether I wanted it to or not. I'd until it stops. I pulled the blanket up to my chin, my breathing shallow, my eyes darting around the room. The scratching was moving now. First on the far wall, then underneath the floorboards. Closer. Deliberate. There was something methodical about it. Slow. Like it was searching for something or someone. The sound shifted again, now directly outside the window. I dared not move. The lantern's steady glow painted long, distorted shadows across the walls, making every shift in light feel like something was lurking just out of view. The scratching paused. For several long seconds, there was nothing but silence. Then came a faint, almost imperceptible whisper through the thin glass. I couldn't make out the words. It wasn't the wind. It was speech. Repetitive, murmuring. My skin crawled as I squeezed my eyes shut. Don't breathe, don't move, don't make a sound. The minutes crawled by like hours. Finally, the scratching faded, slowly retreating, first away from the window, then down the beams that supported the tower. The wind returned, masking any remaining noise. I waited a full 15 minutes before daring to lower the blanket from my face. The lantern still burned steadily. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When dawn finally bled through the treetops, I sat at the edge of my bed, trying to make sense of what had happened. The scratching was real, I knew that much. But beyond that, what the hell was out there? A raccoon? A bear? Some trick of acoustics? My tired brain tried to rationalize it, but deep down, I knew. No animal scratches wood like that. Not with rhythm. Not with intent. By mid-morning, I decided to shake it off and start my patrol. The trail leading away from the tower was narrow but well-marked, cutting through dense patches of pine and low brush. I carried my field radio, a flashlight, even in broad daylight, and the issued survival knife Mark had left for me in one of the sheds. The forest looked different by day, but not necessarily less intimidating. The towering trees seemed to loom overhead, casting deep pockets of shadow even under the sun. Every so often I paused to check for unauthorized campsites, making notes in the logbook as instructed. Roughly an hour into my patrol, I stumbled across something unexpected. A campsite. It was tucked behind a small hill, not far off the main trail. The tent was small, dome-shaped, and faded yellow, as if it had been here a while. The campfire pit was cold, with remnants of charred wood and ash still fresh. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. I approached slowly, hand gripping my flashlight like a weapon. The flap to the tent was unzipped, partially open. I used the tip of my boot to nudge it wider. Empty. No bags, no gear, no sleeping bags, just an abandoned shell. Something was wrong. My gut twisted as I scanned the area again, remembering Rule 8. If you investigate an abandoned camp and hear a scream, run. The only sound was the wind rustling the trees. I reached for my field radio, thumbing the button. "Tower 3, this is Tower 7. Come in." The static answered first, then Allison's voice followed, calm as ever. "Hey, Oscar, you sound a bit on edge. There's an empty campsite out here. Coordinates." I rattled them off from the map clipped to my vest. "Looks like it's been used recently. What do you want me to do?" A brief pause. "Got it. That's close to my sector. I'll hike out and check it myself. Go ahead and return to your tower." "You sure?" I asked. "I can wait." "No need. You've got enough to deal with on your first week. Head on back, Oscar. You're doing great." Her voice was oddly soothing. I wanted to believe her. I turned back toward Tower 7, but unease gnawed at me the entire hike back. Every shadow felt heavier, every sound sharper. When I finally reached the staircase and began climbing, I paused midway, looking over my shoulder into the trees. A flash of movement just beyond the timberline. It was gone too fast to make out, but I could have sworn it was a figure, standing still, watching me. I quickened my pace, and didn't stop until I was locked inside the cabin again. Later that evening, just before dusk, Allison radioed in. "Hey Oscar, I checked the site. False alarm. Guy had just gone to relieve himself down the trail. He's packed up and left now. All good." I wanted to feel reassured, but something about the way she said it didn't sit right. The campsite had been empty when I arrived, completely empty. And why had the guy left without his tent? The sun dipped below the horizon, swallowing the forest into darkness once more. The lantern flickered briefly as I lit it for the night. My fingers hovered over the rule list once again, my eyes tracing every word like a desperate prayer. Something was out there, something watching, waiting. The game had only just begun. The second night came faster than I wanted. Dusk swallowed the forest like an old secret. The trees shifted in the wind like they were conspiring. By the time I lit the lantern, the shadows had already begun pressing against the cabin windows like silent watchers. I sat at the desk for hours, unable to focus on the old forestry manuals Mark had left behind. My eyes kept drifting to the list of rules sitting right next to me. Those scrawled, shaky blue letters written on that cheap square grid notebook paper. I read Rule 3 again. If you hear a woman crying between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., ignore it. Simple enough, but now it carried weight I hadn't felt before. The scratching from the night before had shaken something loose inside me. A growing awareness that I wasn't just dealing with tall tales or bored humor from previous rangers. The rules were written for a reason. Somebody, Harvey, Rick, had seen something, maybe even survived because of them, or maybe not. Outside, the wind died entirely around midnight. The stillness made it worse, like nature itself was holding its breath. I climbed into bed, fully clothed this time, boots and all. My survival knife rested on the nightstand within easy reach. The lantern's warm light filled the room, and the radio remained off. Then, right on schedule, the clock ticked past 2:13. IMM. The crying started. It was faint at first, soft, broken, like someone struggling to breathe through tears. The voice of a woman, deep inside the trees, somewhere far below my tower. I froze. Every part of my brain screamed to follow Rule 3. Ignore it, stay in bed, don't investigate. But something twisted inside my chest. The crying didn't sound monstrous. It sounded human, desperate, agonizing. Whoever it was, she sounded like she was breaking into pieces with every gasp. My instincts waged war inside me. I should stay put. I should stay put. Instead, my legs swung off the bed. Before I even realized what I was doing, my hands were pulling on my jacket. I grabbed the flashlight, the survival knife, and the radio, still off, and stepped toward the door. I paused one last time, listening. The sobbing continued. It hadn't moved. I opened the door and stepped onto the narrow balcony. The cool night air bit at my skin. My flashlight's beam sliced through the trees, illuminating nothing but a wall of tangled shadows. The crying pulled at me like a hook in my chest. "Just a few steps down," I whispered, trying to justify it. "I'll take a look and come back if it feels wrong." I descended the spiral staircase, the metal steps groaning beneath my boots. The further down I went, the louder the sobbing grew, no longer distant but close. Far too close. By the time my boots hit the soft ground, I was regretting everything. The sobbing had shifted, no longer behind the tree line but directly ahead, somewhere within the thick underbrush that bordered the main trail. My flashlight beam struggled to cut through the heavy mist curling at my feet. I moved toward it, one shaky step at a time. Then I saw her, or at least I thought I did. She was sitting against the trunk of a dead tree, maybe 30 feet away, pale skin almost glowing beneath the moonlight. Long black hair fell in tangled ropes across her face and shoulders, cascading down to the ground. Her frame was thin, unnaturally so. Like the bones barely had enough flesh to hold themselves together. She rocked slowly back and forth, hands cupping her face, muffled sobs breaking between her fingers. The air was cold, far too cold. My breath hung in the air like ghostly fingers. Something deep in my gut begged me to turn back, to run. I knew, on some instinctual level, I was staring at something I wasn't supposed to see. Then she stopped crying. The woman's head jerked up sharply, like a puppet on strings. Her face was wrong. Even in the limited light, I saw how the skin stretched across sharp cheekbones, hollow eye sockets, and wide, unblinking black eyes. Her lips curved into a grin that nearly split her face in half. I froze, my stomach turning inside out. The woman, or whatever she was, tilted her head in one smooth, unnatural motion. Her mouth twitched, her long teeth flashing beneath the moonlight as she grinned wider. Neither of us moved. Then her body shifted sideways, jerking into the darkness like she'd been yanked by invisible wires. The movement was too fast, too erratic. She vanished into the trees within seconds, like the shadows swallowed her whole. I stumbled back, almost tripping over a tree root as my heart pounded like a war drum. Every instinct screamed at me now, run. I didn't hesitate this time. I turned, bolting for the tower, flashlight beam dancing wildly in front of me as my boots pounded the dirt path. Branches slapped at my face and arms. The wind returned, carrying strange, distant whispers that might have just been my imagination. Or not. The tower's outline rose in the distance, its silhouette like a crooked lighthouse in a sea of black. My lungs burned as I forced my legs to push harder. The sobbing started again behind me, closer this time. Rapid, choked gasps interlaced with twisted giggles. I didn't dare look back. My boots hit the first stair of the metal spiral, and I took the steps 3 at a time. The sobbing rose into screams, high-pitched, unnatural wails that rattled inside my skull. I flung myself through the tower door, slamming it shut behind me. My chest heaved as I locked every latch. The screaming stopped instantly, like someone flipped a switch. I staggered back toward the bed, hands trembling uncontrollably. The lantern flickered once, twice, then stabilized. The forest outside was silent again. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. By morning, the world outside looked deceptively peaceful. Golden sunlight broke through the canopy, casting long stripes across the wooden floor. The forest looked harmless again, quiet, beautiful even. But I couldn't shake the weight sitting on my chest. That thing from last night? No, that woman was real, and it wasn't just some poor hiker lost in the woods. After forcing down a protein bar and weak coffee, I pulled out the notebook. The rules stared back at me, like they always had. My fingers traced over Rule 3 again, but my eyes kept drifting to Rule 1. If you see a woman in the woods smiling uncontrollably, don't approach or attract attention. Return to your tower immediately. My breath caught. My mind replayed that grin, that face-splitting grin, like her cheeks would rip apart. Somehow I hadn't connected the two last night, too overwhelmed by the crying, but now it was painfully clear. That was her. I hadn't just broken Rule 3, I'd come dangerously close to breaking Rule 1. I should report this. I needed to tell Allison. The radio buzzed faintly as I flicked it on, static crackling through before her familiar voice answered. "Good morning, Oscar. You sound rough." "I am," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Allison, something happened last night." There was a long pause before she finally said, "I'm listening." I told her everything, the crying, the woman under the tree, the smile, how she vanished into the shadows like she wasn't even human. Allison didn't interrupt. She let me finish in full before she quietly said, "You saw her?" There was no question in her voice, just quiet dread. "So you know what that was?" I asked, my throat tightening. "I've never seen her myself, Oscar," she admitted, "but I've heard others describe it. Before you, there was Harvey. Before him, Rick. You're not the first to report the crying or the smiling woman. Then why the hell didn't you warn me earlier?" My voice cracked with a mixture of fear and anger. "The rules are your warning," she said softly. "You wouldn't have believed it any other way." A bitter taste rose in my mouth. She was right. If someone told me outright, I probably would have written it off as some initiation hazing or urban legend. But seeing it, feeling it, had burned the reality into me. "This isn't just some ghost story, is it?" I whispered. "No, Oscar," Allison said. "It's much older than that." Her words hung there, cold and heavy. I didn't push for details, not yet. Part of me didn't want to know the deeper history, not while I was still trapped out here. We exchanged a few more words about supplies, trail checks, the usual administrative nonsense, but neither of us mentioned the woman again before signing off. I spent most of the day patrolling the trails near the tower, sticking to the most visible paths. The wind carried no sobbing. The trees were still, until I stumbled across the campsite. It was located about 2 miles northwest, tucked into a small clearing I hadn't visited before. There, standing out like a fresh wound against the greenery, was a lone tent, red and yellow, weathered but still intact. I called out first. "Hello? This is Forest Service. Anyone here?" Silence. I crept closer, adrenaline spiking with every step. The campfire had long gone cold. Ashes scattered loosely, but there was no gear, no backpacks, no sleeping bags, just the tent itself. A chill ran down my spine. There should have been someone here. I circled the site carefully, scanning for footprints or any sign of where the camper might have gone. Nothing. No broken branches, no drag marks. Like whoever pitched that tent had simply vanished into thin air. Grim curiosity pulled my gaze to the inside of the tent. I lifted the flap and found nothing but dirt, completely empty. The worst part? The whole thing felt staged, set up, like bait. I backed away slowly, heart hammering. This was no ordinary abandoned campsite. I remembered Rule 8. If you investigate an abandoned campsite and hear a woman scream, run to your tower immediately. There was no scream. Not yet. But I could feel the presence of something watching me, heavy, suffocating. My radio buzzed suddenly, static breaking the silence. "Allison, to Oscar," her voice called, calm but oddly forced. "I've got your coordinates. I'm nearby. Don't worry." I nearly dropped the radio. "Nearby? What do you mean you're nearby?" "I was out on patrol," she replied easily. "Thought I'd check your perimeter. Stay put. I'll meet you there." I stared at the radio, hands growing clammy. Something didn't sit right. Allison had never once left her tower before. She'd always stayed remote. And then I remembered something else from Rule 2. If a voice comes over the radio that isn't from your assigned tower, do not respond. I checked the tower list. Allison's post was nearly 6 miles south. She couldn't have reached me this quickly. The voice on the radio wasn't Allison. I turned the radio off immediately and ran. Hard. The screaming started then. Loud, guttural, full of rage and agony. The same twisted voice from the trees last night. It followed me as I bolted through the forest, dodging low branches and uneven terrain. I didn't stop running until I saw my tower rising above the treetops. As I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it tight, the screaming stopped once again, cut off like a switch being flipped. I collapsed into my chair, breathless and shaking. Something was escalating. The rules were no longer passive warnings. They were traps waiting to be sprung. And I had barely survived 2 nights. The third night came faster than I was ready for. Even before the sun fully set, an oppressive stillness had already settled over the woods. No wind, no bird song, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. The forest held its breath, as if it too was waiting for something awful to arrive. Inside the tower, I double-checked every door and window, tested my radio, and laid the rule sheet flat on my desk, reading it for what felt like the 100th time. Every rule now carried a weight I hadn't fully grasped at first. They weren't just guidelines. They were my life raft. But none of the rules addressed what happened today. I sat back and stared out the window, replaying the encounter from the abandoned campsite, the voice on the radio pretending to be Allison, the screaming that had chased me, and something else, something I hadn't admitted out loud yet. The campsite hadn't always been there. I knew that clearing. I had passed by it the previous day during my rounds, and there had been nothing but trees, no fire pit, no tent. The whole thing had materialized overnight, or worse, it had been placed there deliberately, as if it wanted me to find it. I didn't know who or what was setting these traps, but one thing was becoming horrifyingly clear. I was no longer dealing with simple hauntings or echoes of the dead. This was active, intelligent, and focused on me. The radio hissed again. I froze, heart slamming against my ribcage. Allison to Oscar. "You still holding up out there?" Her voice. This time it really was her. I hesitated a moment too long before answering. "I'm here," I said, my throat dry. "Barely." "You're doing fine, Oscar," she replied. "Better than most." There was something somber in her tone, like she was already grieving for me. "I need to ask you something," I said suddenly, before I could lose my nerve. "About Harvey." The radio crackled softly. Silence. Then, "I figured you might. You said he was your predecessor." "That's right." "But that's not all, is it?" My voice wavered. "There was something else, something that drove him, like it's driving me." Allison's sigh drifted through the static. "Harvey thought he could beat it, that he could understand her. He thought knowledge would save him. Her, the smiling woman, the one from the rules. He started investigating the rules themselves," Allison continued, "where they came from, why they exist. He went beyond his patrol zone, broke every boundary, and eventually, he stopped answering." I clenched my fist around the radio. "Was that why you left the 10th rule off my list?" I asked quietly. The static sharpened like a blade. There was a long pause, but when Allison finally spoke again, her voice was faint, almost a whisper. "Oscar, there is no 10th rule." But I didn't believe her. I couldn't. Before I could press her further, the radio cut off entirely, just a faint pop of static, then silence. I stared at the dead receiver, suddenly feeling more alone than ever. Hours passed. The tower grew darker as the last hints of sunlight vanished completely. My nerves stretched tighter with each tick of my watch. Midnight came and went, but I didn't dare sleep. I sat there in the dim light of my lantern waiting for whatever came next, and then, at exactly 2:13 a.m., the scratching began. It started faint, like dry leaves brushing against the metal siding, but soon the rhythm grew sharper, more deliberate. Claws. Something with claws. The sound circled the base of the tower slowly, scraping along the metal legs, moving clockwise, then back again, faster. Always faster. I glanced at the rules. Rule 7. If you hear scratching anywhere, whether inside or near the outhouse, turn off all communications and hide under your blanket until the scratching stops. My hands were already moving before my brain fully processed it. I flicked off the radio, pulled the batteries out of the handheld, killed every source of light except for the lantern, which I carefully dimmed until it was nearly dark. Heart pounding, I crawled into bed, pulled the thick blanket over my head, and tried to slow my breathing. The scratching grew louder, closer. Now it was right outside the tower door. I could hear something heavy pressing against the wood as the claws dragged up and down, up and down. It was methodical. It wanted me to hear it, to know it was there. Then silence. Not a long silence, only enough to make me second guess whether it was truly gone, and that was when the breathing started. Slow, labored, like lungs struggling to inhale through water. It wasn't outside anymore. It was inside. I tightened the blanket around my face, barely daring to breathe. The floorboards creaked near my bed. Something shifted its weight. I could feel the air pressure change, like someone towering over me. A faint whisper, impossibly close to my ear. "I see you." My lungs screamed for air, but I kept my lips sealed. Another few seconds, and then the presence vanished. So suddenly that it felt like being released from drowning. I lay there, trembling violently from what felt like an hour, before finally daring to peek out from under the blanket. The room was empty. The scratching was gone. The door remained shut. But on the wooden floor near the foot of my bed, deep gouges carved into the floorboards, as if something with long, sharp claws had been circling me while I slept. I shuddered and stumbled to my desk. Flipping the lantern back on fully, my eyes darted to the rule sheet once more. The rules were working, but barely. Something was changing, escalating, and I was running out of time. By sunrise, my nerves were frayed like wires about to snap. Sleep was impossible. I sat at the small desk, my coffee long gone cold, eyes locked on the gouges carved into the floor near my bed. They weren't there yesterday. They weren't supposed to be there at all. I had followed the rules. I had done everything right. But that thing, whatever it was, had gotten inside anyway. I flipped open my notebook, fingers trembling slightly, and started sketching out the claw marks, trying to measure the distance between each groove. Each arc seemed almost calculated, as if the creature had circled me in slow, deliberate patterns while I hid beneath the blanket. Not random at all. There was a mind behind this. The thought sat heavy in my gut as I heard the faint crackle of the radio again. It had turned itself back on overnight. That wasn't supposed to happen either. "Allison to Oscar, you there?" Her voice was softer today, strained. I hesitated. "Yeah, I'm here. You sound shaken." "I had another visitor last night," I said bitterly, staring at the floor, scratching this time. Inside. Silence on the other end. "Allison," I continued carefully, "are you sure you've told me everything?" She exhaled slowly, like someone preparing to confess. "Oscar, you've seen more than most. That means you're getting close to something." "To what?" "To her," Allison whispered. "To whatever's behind all of this." The line went dead again, leaving me with only the hollow hum of static. I slammed my fist against the desk. She was hiding something. They all were. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers, real ones. Grabbing my jacket, I slung my pack over my shoulder and headed down the spiraling metal stairs of the tower. The morning air was sharp and cold, biting at my skin, but I welcomed it. Anything to clear the fog building in my head. I wasn't supposed to leave the tower perimeter, not without proper authorization, but after last night, the rules felt increasingly arbitrary. Half measures to delay the inevitable. The forest swallowed me quickly as I followed the main path. My boots crunched over dead leaves and gravel. Pine needles coated the trail like a soft carpet, muffling my footsteps. The deeper I went, the more unnatural the forest became. Birdsong was absent. The wind didn't stir the trees. Even the insects had gone silent. It felt like walking into a place that existed outside of time. After nearly an hour, I stumbled upon it, a clearing I hadn't noticed before. The trees here were oddly spaced, unnaturally symmetrical, as if planted by design rather than by nature. In the center stood a rotting wooden structure, an old ranger outpost long abandoned. Its roof sagged inward. The windows were black holes. The front door hung open by a single rusted hinge, swaying gently. I approached slowly, my heart pounding louder with each step. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and decay. Broken furniture littered the floor. Faded maps still clung to the damp walls, edges curling like withered paper. I scanned the room with my flashlight until it landed on something sitting atop a dusty desk. A small wooden box. I opened it carefully. Inside was a stack of yellowed Polaroids. One by one, I studied the photographs. Most were of the forest, the towers, and patrol checkpoints. Routine images, but near the bottom of the stack, the photos grew. Unsettling. One photo showed the very tower I had just left, but standing at its base was a woman. Pale skin, dark, wet hair hanging over her face. Even through the grainy film, I could see her smile, stretched too wide to be human. The next photo showed that same woman, but closer now. And in the third, she was standing directly beneath the tower, looking up. Looking at me. I dropped the stack, bile rising in my throat. My legs threatened to give out. That wasn't just some ghostly figure. That was the thing that had entered my room. The thing from the rules. The smiling woman. As I tried to steady my breath, my flashlight flickered violently. No, not now. Not here. The beam stuttered in and out before cutting completely, plunging me into complete darkness. I fumbled for my backup lantern, hands shaking, but the cold air around me shifted, growing denser, heavier. A faint giggle echoed from somewhere deep inside the outpost. Then another, closer. I spun toward the sound, heart hammering against my ribs. My breath came out in short, panicked bursts. A shadow moved just beyond the broken door frame, tall and thin. She was in here with me. I backed away slowly, feet crunching on debris, trying to keep my breathing controlled. The rules screamed in my head, "Stay calm, don't draw attention." But as I reached for the door, another figure appeared, not the smiling woman, someone else. It was a man, ragged, filthy, wearing what was once a ranger's uniform. His face was gaunt, hollowed by starvation and terror, his wide sunken eyes locked onto mine. "Harvey?" I whispered. He flinched at his name, as if the sound burned him. "You shouldn't be here," Harvey rasped. "She's watching." I swallowed hard, barely able to find my voice. "You're alive." "No," he shook his head. "Not really. Not anymore." Behind him, the woman's silhouette shifted, her head tilted unnaturally, almost parallel with her shoulders, eyes gleaming from beneath dripping strands of black hair. "You broke the circle," Harvey hissed, stepping closer. "The rules. They keep her fed but contained. When you started digging, you made her strong." "I didn't." "You did," he snapped. "Every question feeds her. Every time you search for answers, you invite her in." The giggling intensified, now bouncing off the rotten walls. The air grew freezing. Harvey glanced behind him, then back at me. "You still have a chance," he whispered. "Go back. Don't look for me again. Don't ask. Don't follow." Then he shoved me, hard, toward the exit. I stumbled backward into the sunlight, gasping as the warmth of the morning rushed over my skin. When I turned to look back inside, the outpost was empty. No Harvey, no smiling woman, nothing. Only the photographs remained, scattered across the floor like the remnants of a terrible secret. And in that moment, for the first time since arriving here, I realized I was already too far in. The silence in my tower felt heavier than ever. I sat at the desk, fingers nervously tapping against the wooden surface, eyes fixed on the radio that hadn't spoken since my return from the outpost. Allison was gone, vanished into static. Harvey, if he was even real, had disappeared like a shadow at dawn. And the photographs I'd recovered now sat in a pile beside me, each one radiating a cold, invisible weight. I couldn't stop staring at them. That woman? Her pale skin, the grotesque grin carved into her face. It was becoming clearer now. She wasn't simply haunting these woods. She was bound to them, beat by those of us foolish enough to come looking. But who was she really? The sun sank lower outside, bleeding red across the endless canopy of pines. Another night was coming, another round of rules. I rubbed my hands over my face, exhausted but too wired to sleep. My thoughts spiraled back to Harvey's warning. Every question feeds her. I had asked too many already. A knock. My head snapped toward the door instinctively, but no one ever knocked up here. No one was supposed to. Visitors weren't allowed this deep into the restricted fire zone. My blood froze. Another knock. 3 soft, evenly spaced raps. I moved toward the door carefully, my flashlight gripped tight in one hand. "Who's there?" My voice came out thin, cracking. A pause, then a voice answered, soft and oddly familiar. "Sam." "It's Sam. Oscar." Sam? Mark's daughter. The girl who'd brought me supplies weeks ago. I cracked open the door an inch, eyes narrowing at her form barely visible in the fading light. She looked different. The first time I'd met her, she was bright, upbeat, a little too friendly for the situation. Now her hair was messy, face paler than I remembered, and her backpack was gone. She clutched her arms tight across her chest, shivering slightly. "How did you get here?" I asked. "I thought Mark or his son handled the deliveries." "They do, usually." She looked up at me, her eyes wide, lips quivering. "But I had to come back. I know what's happening. About her." Her voice dropped to a whisper, as if the trees themselves were listening. I hesitated, the memory of Harvey's desperate warning still echoing inside my skull. "How do you know?" I asked quietly. "Because Harvey told me," Sam whispered, "before he disappeared." I opened the door wider, gesturing her inside. The fear and desperation etched into her face felt real, or at least convincing. She stepped in, glancing around nervously as though expecting something or someone to be waiting in the corners. "You've seen her, haven't you?" Sam asked. I nodded stiffly. "I have." "The smiling woman," she said. "She's older than this forest, older than any of us. She was bound here long before any of these towers existed. The rules, they don't protect us. They contain her. The moment you break them, she notices." I swallowed hard, throat dry. "Who gave you all this information?" "My father used to be a ranger out here," Sam whispered, voice almost breaking. "Before Mark, before Allison. He found her too. He tried to burn the place down, thought fire would purge whatever this is." Her gaze dropped to the floor. "He didn't make it." The weight of her words pressed down on me like a physical force. I sat down across from her, studying every twitch of her face. "You said Harvey told you this," I pressed. "How?" "He's missing." "I saw him," she replied quickly. "A few nights ago. He found me near the base of your tower. He was hiding. He said you were close to figuring it out, but you needed help before she took you too." Her story aligned too well with what I had seen. The photographs, the outpost, the rules. But something still gnawed at me. "Why come to me now?" I asked. "Why tonight?" Sam looked up sharply, her voice barely audible. "Because tonight's different. The boundary is thinning. She's stronger when the moon turns fully red. That's why Harvey vanished. That's why my father vanished. And you're next." As if on cue, the last light of the day vanished, plunging the forest into a suffocating blackness. The moon, blood red and swollen, hung low beyond the treetops. I felt the cold wash over me like a creeping fog. Sam stepped closer. "We have to stop her. There's still time." I frowned. "How?" Her hand reached into her jacket, pulling out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Slowly, she unwrapped it, revealing a vial of thick, dark liquid and a box of old wooden matches. "This is what my father was planning to use," she said, her voice shaking, "to finish what he started." I leaned forward, eyeing the objects carefully. "You want to burn her?" "Not her," Sam corrected. "The body. The original body. The one buried beneath the old well by Tower 3. That's where she was first bound." My head spun. The old well. I remembered seeing it marked faintly on one of the aged maps in the outpost. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. Just another landmark lost to years of abandonment. "If we burn the remains," Sam continued, "we might sever her connection here. End the cycle. The rules. The disappearances. The entity haunting these woods. Could it really be undone so simply?" It sounded almost too hopeful. But I was already in too deep. If there was even a sliver of chance to end this nightmare, I had to take it. I nodded slowly. "Okay, let's finish this." Sam smiled faintly, her pale face momentarily illuminated by the flickering lantern light. Somewhere in the distance, just outside the thin wooden walls of the tower, came the faintest sound of movement. A soft shuffle, a dry giggle, low, guttural, and entirely inhuman. Sam didn't flinch, but I did. The night felt heavier as we stepped out of the tower. The blood moon glared down like an open wound, illuminating the forest in a dim copper glow. Every branch, every trunk cast long, crooked shadows that writhed and reached across our path. The air was dense, colder than usual, carrying an unnatural stillness. No crickets, no wind, no distant howls of wildlife, just silence and the faint echo of our own cautious steps. Sam led the way with a determination I couldn't decide was brave or reckless. She held the wrapped vial tight against her chest, as if it were some fragile talisman. I kept the flashlight steady, the narrow beam barely penetrating the darkness. "The well's just past this ridge," she whispered. My heart pounded against my ribs. I forced myself not to look behind us, though every instinct screamed that something was trailing just out of sight, matching our pace. "How do you know it's still there?" I asked, trying to fill the silence. "My father found it," Sam said. "That's how he first learned about her. The woman, she wasn't always what she is now. Decades ago, she was part of some kind of ritual. A cult, I guessed." Sam nodded grimly. "The Church of Hollow Eyes. They worshipped her, or what they thought she was. They promised her immortality through sacrifice. But something went wrong. The binding was incomplete. She died. But whatever was left of her lingered, hungry." As the words left her mouth, I thought again of the voices I'd heard at night, the scratches along my tower walls, the grotesque grinning face that had followed me since the first week. This wasn't some random haunting. It was calculated, old, methodical. "And the rules?" I pressed. "Who made them?" "My father," Sam said. "With Harpy's help, after others started vanishing, they pieced together the patterns, the triggers. The rules don't stop her, they only delay her. But eventually, she always finds a way." We reached a clearing where the trees thinned out, exposing a flat patch of earth. In the center sat a circular stone well, barely 3 feet high, its stones cracked and discolored with time. Vines coiled tightly around its rim like skeletal fingers trying to seal the opening. The air around it felt colder, heavier, and with every breath, it was as if the forest itself pressed inward. "This is it," Sam whispered, voice barely audible. I approached slowly, peering into the well's gaping mouth. Nothing but pure black greeted me, so dense it seemed to swallow the beam of my flashlight entirely. "How deep?" I asked. "Deep enough," Sam replied, her voice trembling for the first time. "The remains are at the bottom. That's where my father tried and failed." The ground beneath my boots shifted slightly, unstable. The dirt felt soft, loose, as if disturbed recently. My stomach twisted. "Did your father—" I couldn't finish the question. Sam only nodded, lowering her gaze. I set my backpack down and pulled out the coil of rope, tying one end to a nearby tree. The plan was simple. I would descend, locate the remains, and use the accelerant Sam had brought to finish what her father had started. Simple, if not for the gnawing terror threatening to freeze me in place. "You don't have to do this," Sam said quietly. "I do," I whispered back. As I lowered myself into the well, the stone walls quickly swallowed me whole. The temperature plummeted with every foot of descent, my breath becoming thick puffs in the narrow space. The air smelled of damp rot and something metallic beneath it all. Old blood, maybe. I hit bottom far quicker than I expected. Barely 15 feet down, my flashlight beam danced across the small chamber, illuminating scattered bones half buried in the soft dirt, a few strands of decayed cloth clinging to brittle joints. But what froze me wasn't the remains themselves. It was the crude symbols carved into the walls. Arcane markings, loops, and spirals that pulsed under the light, as if alive. The Church of Hollow Eyes. I knelt beside the skeletal frame. Its skull was cracked, jaw half hinged open in a silent, eternal scream. Long strands of blackened hair still clung to patches of scalp. The hands were twisted unnaturally, fingers gnarled, nails long and sharp. Even in death, her body retained the grotesque hints of the creature I had seen stalking me night after night. A quiet rasp echoed from above. I froze. "Sam?" I called softly. No reply. I strained my ears but heard only the faint shuffle of movement far above me, followed by what sounded like a low, breathy chuckle. My mouth went dry. Fighting the urge to panic, I retrieved the small canister of kerosene from my pack, unscrewing the cap with trembling fingers. The scent of fuel mixed with the stale air instantly. With every splash, the liquid soaked into the bones, pooling around the base of the well. Then, the matchbox. I struck the first match, snuffed instantly by the oppressive dampness. A second. Gone. My hand shook as I struck a third. This time it held, flickering weakly in the suffocating darkness. A shriek exploded from the black void above. Not Sam's voice, hers. The smiling woman. A sudden gust of wind rushed down the shaft, nearly extinguishing the fragile flame in my hand. I cupped it desperately, lowering it to the fuel-soaked bones as the guttural cry grew louder, closer. The match touched the kerosene. Fire erupted instantly, racing up the walls, illuminating the entire shaft with a violent orange glow. The ancient symbols writhed as if in agony, twisting and wriggling beneath the flames. The bones blackened and cracked, sending sharp pops echoing through the chamber. The screaming intensified, no longer confined above but swirling all around me, her voice in my ears, inside my skull, like nails scraping along my brain. The walls shook violently, loose dirt cascading down as small stones tumbled onto my back. I screamed, gripping the rope with both hands, scrambling to climb as the flames licked at my boots. The fire illuminated something just behind me. Long black hair trailing upward, eyes burning like coals in the suffocating smoke. The rope jerked. Something grabbed it from above. I looked up. Sam's face stared down into the shaft, but her expression was wrong. Her smile had stretched far too wide, her eyes gleaming with unnatural hunger. "You're too late, Oscar," she hissed. Then the rope went slack. The rope slipped through my hands like a dying heartbeat. Gravity pulled me down, the flaming shaft spinning wildly as I fell. My back slammed against the stone wall, ricocheting me across the narrow well before I landed hard on the dirt floor below. Air whooshed from my lung. For several seconds, all I could hear was the furious roar of fire above me and the pounding of my pulse in my ears. The smoke thickened quickly, stinging my eyes and throat. I coughed violently, pulling my shirt up over my mouth in a feeble attempt to breathe. My flashlight had been lost somewhere during the fall, but the fire provided a flickering, hellish illumination. The flames licked higher and higher, consuming the remains and the cursed symbols etched into the walls. But I could still hear her voice, piercing through the flames, that haunting mix of a woman's scream and guttural, animalistic snarls. She wasn't burning. Or rather, the thing she had become wasn't. The walls began to groan. Stones cracked, and dirt poured from between the crevices. The entire shaft was starting to collapse under the heat. I had seconds, maybe less. Desperate, I scanned for anything that might resemble an exit. The narrow chamber offered no ladder, no secondary passage, just smooth, ancient stone. But as the firelight danced across one side, it revealed a narrow opening barely wider than my shoulders. A service crawl space, perhaps, left unfinished or long forgotten. I didn't think. There wasn't time to think. Dropping to my stomach, I clawed my way into the tight tunnel, scraping my arms raw against the jagged stone. Behind me, the shaft roared louder. The heat licked at my boots as the flames surged closer. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might rupture. The crawl space angled downward, leading me deeper into the unknown belly of the earth. Every inch forward felt like burrowing into a grave. My body screamed from the strain, my breath shallow and rapid as panic clawed at the edge of my sanity. If this path dead-ended, I was dead. "Oscar, come back!" Her whisper followed me. Somehow, impossibly, it was inside the tunnel, bouncing from every surface as if the rock itself carried her voice. I bit down on my lip, hard enough to taste blood, forcing myself to keep moving. The tunnel eventually widened slightly, enough for me to sit up on my knees. My flashlight miraculously appeared just ahead, cracked but still functional. I snatched it and clicked it on. The beam sliced through the thick air, revealing a cavernous chamber beyond the tunnel. I stumbled forward and emerged into a hollowed-out space, much larger than the well. The ceiling arched high above, supported by wooden beams long rotted and warped by time. Stale water dripped from cracks, creating small pools on the uneven floor. Old ceremonial markings coated the stone walls, pagan symbols, spirals, and crude figures that made my skin crawl. At the far end of the chamber stood an altar, not stone but wood, blackened with rot, covered in dried blood and wax. Around it lay rusted chains and tattered cloth strips. On the wall behind it, a mural had been crudely carved. A woman standing above a line of kneeling figures, her arms raised high, her grin wide and unnatural. The smiling woman. I staggered toward it, unable to tear my eyes away from the grotesque imagery. This chamber wasn't part of the original well. It was something older, something far more sinister. This was the birthplace of the curse. A faint movement in the corner of my vision froze me. Sam, or what looked like Sam. She stood on the far side of the altar, half lit by my trembling flashlight beam. But her features had begun to change, subtly at first. Her eyes glimmered too brightly, reflecting the light like an animal's. Her lips curled unnaturally wide, revealing too many teeth. "You weren't supposed to come here, Oscar," she said softly, her voice layered with something beneath it. A second voice, the smiling woman's voice. "Sam, you don't have to do this," I managed to croak. The creature tilted its head. "Sam's not here anymore." She stepped around the altar, moving slowly, gracefully, like a predator stalking prey. "You've broken the cycle," she continued. "Burning the vessel only delays me. But you opened the gate when you entered this place. This is where it all began, and where it always ends." I backed away, slipping slightly on the damp stone. My flashlight beam jittered wildly across the chamber, casting long shadows that seemed to twitch and convulse. "Why me?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "I didn't do anything." Her grin widened further, jaw creaking unnaturally as bone popped beneath her skin. "You came looking for truth." Her voice was almost mocking now. "You read the rules. You followed the clues. You dug up what should have stayed buried. That's enough." The air in the chamber thickened. A low hum vibrated through the stone beneath my feet. I realized suddenly that I wasn't alone. Not entirely. The shadows around us weren't just shadows. Figures emerged from the darkness. 5 of them, silent, barely visible, their faces twisted into eternal grins. The others, the lost souls, Harvey, Rick, the family from the photographs. Their bodies decayed, eyes hollow, but all sharing the same stretched, unnatural smile. They circled me like vultures awaiting the inevitable. The smiling woman stepped closer, her hair writhed as if alive, floating weightlessly behind her like a veil of shadows. The temperature plummeted. "Join us, Oscar," she whispered. "You've come so far." My back hit the cold stone wall. There was nowhere left to run. The flashlight flickered, and for a brief second the entire chamber was swallowed in total darkness. When the beam returned, she was inches from my face. Her face hovered inches from mine, her grin frozen, those hollow black eyes reflecting back the pale beam of my weakening flashlight. Her breath was cold and sour, like damp earth and rot. I couldn't move. My legs had given up on me, and my hands trembled uncontrollably as I pressed my back harder against the stone wall, as if trying to merge with it and disappear. "You feel it, don't you?" she whispered. "The truth underneath your skin. You've always belonged here." Her voice wasn't only in my ears anymore. It was inside my skull, pulsing like a second heartbeat. The other figures, the broken, smiling husks of Harvey, Rick, and the others, stood completely still, watching, as though waiting for a signal. The chamber's air seemed thicker now, vibrating faintly, like the pressure before a violent storm. "This was never about rules," she continued, her voice caressing my mind. "The rules only kept you alive long enough to be useful." The truth hit me like a hammer. The rules were never designed to protect anyone. They were merely a game, a manipulation, a ritual. "Your feeding office," I croaked. Her smile deepened, if that was even possible. "Feeding? Oh no, Oscar, you misunderstand." She stepped back, raising her arms, addressing the silent audience behind her. I collect. I preserve. I make them mine. The corpses behind her twitched as though in response, their spines snapping unnaturally, their heads jerking with that same grotesque angle of impossible smiles. My stomach twisted. I don't want this, I whispered. I never wanted this. But you came anyway, she replied softly. Curiosity always leads you here. That's how it works. You sought answers, you read the warnings, and you still stayed. And now, you understand. The buzzing in my head intensified. I clutched my temples, my vision swimming, the chamber blurring in and out of focus. She was trying to break me, to hollow me out as she had done with the others. You could resist, of course, she murmured, leaning forward again. But you won't. No one does. The others all fought too. They screamed, they prayed, they begged. But the more they resisted, the more beautiful they became. I felt my knees give way completely. My body crumpled to the damp ground, my breathing shallow and fast. My flashlight rolled away, its beam casting long, flickering shadows across the chamber's grotesque mural. And then, as if on cue, the others began to move forward, their disjointed puppet-like steps jerking toward me. The sound of cracking joints filled the air, bones grinding against tendons. Please, I choked, barely able to form the word. You've already made your choice, she said. You just haven't admitted it yet. The closest of the smiling corpses knelt beside me, Harvey. His decayed face was still faintly recognizable beneath the collapsed skin, his clouded eyes locked on mine, his mouth unnaturally wide. The others encircled me, their silent forms leaning in, the stench of death choking me. You brought this upon yourself, Oscar, the smiling woman whispered directly into my mind now. There is only one way this ends. My mind screamed for escape, but my body was failing. I felt the cold, bony hands of Harvey clamp down onto my shoulders, pinning me in place as Rick's disjointed arm reached for my face, fingers curling like claws. And then, a sound, a faint crackling echo, distant but sharp, the radio. My forgotten handheld radio, which had somehow survived the fall, squawked to life. Static hissed through the chamber. The smiling woman's expression twitched. Her grin faltered for the briefest of moments. The corpses around me froze mid-motion. The static sharpened into something clearer. A faint voice, barely audible, cutting through the interference. Oscar, listen to me. Sam, not the imitation standing before me, but the real voice. Weak, distorted, but real. You have to fight it, she whispered through the static. She can't take you if you don't let her. She needs you to submit. That's how she binds you. The smiling woman let out a low hiss, her smile twitching with anger as she turned her head toward the sound. Her control had faltered. For the first time, I saw a sliver of vulnerability ripple across her shifting form. You're lying, she spat. There is no Sam. There never was. The voice crackled again. Burn it. Burn her. My hand instinctively reached toward my belt. Miraculously, my lighter was still there. The canister of fuel I had packed remained strapped to my pack when I fell. The smiling woman's eyes snapped back to me, her grin breaking open like tearing flesh. You won't, she hissed. You can't. I fumbled with trembling fingers, retrieving the lighter, my thumb struggling against the slick sweat coating my hand. Every second felt like a lifetime. Harvey's grip on my shoulders tightened painfully, as if sensing my intent, but the brief crack in her control had loosened their collective hold. You belong to me, she screamed, her voice losing its seductive silk, transforming into a shrill, bestial wail. The lighter sparked, then ignited. You're wrong, I rasped, flipping the fuel open and hurling it toward her. The liquid sprayed across her rotting dress and the decaying altar behind her. In one motion, I flicked the flame forward. The chamber exploded in light. The smiling woman let out a scream unlike anything I'd ever heard, a howl that was part rage, part agony, part something far older than language itself. Her form convulsed, her body twisting and writhing as the fire consumed her. The figures around me spasmed violently, as though caught in an unseen wind. their grins stretching into horrifying rictuses as their bodies began to ignite as well. I crawled backwards, shielding my face as the inferno roared to life. The smell of burning flesh and ancient rot filled the chamber, thick and nauseating. The walls trembled, stones cracked overhead, dirt rained from above. "You will never leave," she screeched through the flames. "You are mine." But her voice grew weaker with every passing second, the flames devouring the last of her monstrous form. The corpses of Harvey, Rick, and the others collapsed into ash, their grins finally fading as their souls were released. The cavern groaned louder now, collapsing from the force of the fire. I stumbled to my feet, my legs barely obeying, and sprinted toward the narrowing crawl space that had first led me here. Behind me, the chamber was caving in, rocks thundering down as the inferno raged. The smiling woman's final shriek echoed once more, fading into nothingness as the tunnel sealed behind me. For the first time since this nightmare began, there was silence. I kept crawling forward, the light ahead growing stronger. Morning was breaking. The sun was barely beginning to climb over the trees as I stumbled out of the collapsing tunnel. My hands were raw, scraped and bleeding from clawing my way through the narrow rock passage, my lungs burning with every ragged breath. The cold morning air cut into my skin, but I hardly noticed. All I could feel was the weight of what I had just done, and the overwhelming silence that followed it. The forest around me looked almost peaceful, the way it had that first morning I arrived. Birds chirped in the distance, the breeze rustled the tops of the pines gently, as if nothing horrific had ever lurked beneath this ground. But I knew better now. The monster was gone, or at least I prayed she was. I had burned her. I had burned them all. The rules? The endless rules had finally been broken. I looked back once, toward where the entrance of the cave had been, but there was nothing left. Just a pile of rocks and dirt, as if the earth itself had closed over her remains, sealing the nightmare inside forever. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, it was over. But that hope barely had time to take root before my radio crackled. At first it was only static, soft and faint like distant rainfall. Then came the familiar voice. "Oscar? Oscar, are you there?" It was Sam. I froze. My mind raced. Sam was dead. At least, the thing pretending to be Sam had been burned in that chamber. But this voice sounded normal again. Real. Alive. "Sam?" My voice cracked. "Where are you?" "I'm at your tower," she answered calmly, almost cheerfully. "I've been waiting for you." Cold sweat trickled down my neck. I had left my tower abandoned days ago. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. No one should have known I was even alive. "How did you—" Her voice cut me off, soft and steady. "You should come home, Oscar. We need to finish this." The radio went dead. My legs trembled as I lowered the handset. The rising sun offered no comfort anymore. It only seemed to mock me with its empty warmth. My tower was supposed to be my refuge, my safe place. Now it was the final destination she had lured me back to. I had only one choice left. By mid-morning, I reached the base of my fire tower. The woods had grown eerily still. Not a single bird sang. The leaves above me barely moved. Even the familiar rustle of small animals was absent, as though everything was holding its breath, watching. From below, the tower looked perfectly normal. The same rickety wooden staircase spiraling upward, the same observation room perched on top, its large windows gleaming under the bright sky. But as I stared up, I could see movement inside. A shadow, pacing slowly, waiting. I gripped the handle of my hunting knife tighter, my only remaining weapon. My lighter and fuel were gone. This time, if she came for me, it would be up close. Step by step, I climbed. Each creak of the old boards beneath my boots echoed like gunshots. The higher I ascended, the heavier the air became. My breath grew shallow again. My heart pounded against my ribs. She was up there. She was waiting. At the final platform, I paused, gripping the railing with white knuckles. The door was ajar. swinging slightly with the wind. "Oscar!" Sam's voice called from inside, unnervingly calm. "You made it!" I pushed the door open. She stood by the window, staring out at the forest below, her back to me. She wore the same clothes as before, the flannel shirt, the jeans, the hiking boots. Her brown hair hung loose, just as it had the first time we met. For a brief moment, I could almost pretend it really was Sam, the real Sam. But then she turned. Her face was flawless, too flawless. The grin spread slowly, too wide. Her eyes locked onto mine with that unnatural stillness. Deep, black, endless. "I've missed you," she whispered. "You're not Sam," I said. My voice steadied despite the dread twisting inside me. She took a step closer. "I can be anyone you need, Oscar. That's how I found you in the first place. You wanted someone to help you, to guide you." My pulse quickened. I circled the room, keeping distance between us. The corners of the cabin felt smaller now, the walls closing in. "Why me?" I demanded. "Why any of us?" She smiled wider, revealing perfect white teeth that never touched each other. "Because you were broken, easy to lure, you all were. Harvey, Rick, even Allison, you all came here running from something. Pain, guilt, loss." I stopped moving. The truth slammed into me with horrifying clarity. We were never random victims. The forest called to us because we were already fractured. "You used us," I said through clenched teeth. "I freed you," she corrected softly. "I gave you purpose. I gave you rules. Without me, you'd still be lost in your meaningless lives, wouldn't you?" "You're lying," I spat. Her head cocked to the side as though studying me. "Then why did you stay, Oscar? After all those nights, all those warnings, you could have left." I wanted to deny it. I wanted to scream, but deep down, a part of me knew she was right. I could have left long before, but I hadn't. I kept digging, kept searching. "Because I needed answers," I whispered. "And now you have them," she said gently, almost lovingly. The radio behind her crackled again. Another voice pierced the tension. A new voice. "Oscar." It was Allison's voice this time. "Run." The creature's smile faltered for half a second, a flash of rage bleeding through the mask. "You don't get to leave," she growled. Before I could react, she lunged. Her lunge was impossibly fast. I barely managed to throw myself sideways as her outstretched hand swiped at empty air. The momentum of her charge sent her crashing into the table behind me, shattering it into splinters. The cabin shook with the impact. I scrambled to my feet, my knife raised, heart hammering so hard it drowned out my thoughts. The air around us felt charged, vibrating with a low, humming pressure that made my skin crawl. She turned slowly, no longer hiding the truth beneath Sam's face. The illusion peeled away like skin melting off bone. Her neck elongated unnaturally, eyes sinking deeper into hollow sockets, jaw distending into that grotesque grin I had seen in my worst nightmares. Her thin, leathery arms bent backward at impossible angles, joints cracking like brittle twigs. She was no longer pretending. There was nothing left of Sam now. "You can't escape me, Oscar," the creature hissed. Its voice layered as though a dozen others whispered alongside her. "No one ever has." The temperature plummeted. Frost gathered on the windows. My breath came out in white bursts. The room felt smaller, like the walls were pressing inward, trapping me with her. I backed toward the doorway, forcing myself to steady my shaking hand. "You think I didn't read your rules?" I whispered, voice tight. "You tried to make me follow them, but you made one mistake." The thing's head tilted, eyes narrowing. "You let me see what happens when I break them." I lunged forward, catching her off guard. The blade of my hunting knife drove deep into her side, sinking into cold flesh. A scream tore out of her mouth, high-pitched and unnatural, like the shriek of metal tearing apart. She recoiled, thrashing against the walls, knocking over shelves and furniture as she writhed in agony. Without waiting, I turned and bolted down the stairs. Every footfall echoed through the hollow metal, a drumbeat of desperation. My hands gripped the railing to keep balance as I skipped steps, nearly tumbling more than once. The creature's screams followed me, reverberating through the tower like banshee wails. I hit the ground running, heart in my throat, tearing through the dense trees toward the only place left, the cave. My mind screamed at me that it was suicide, but I had no choice. The rules meant nothing here anymore. But the cave was where this thing had first fed, where it had first grown, and maybe, just maybe, where it could finally be destroyed. Branches clawed at my face, ripping skin as I pushed through. Behind me, her shrieking gave way to heavy, thundering footsteps, inhuman, disjointed, relentless. "You can't run from me, Oscar," she bellowed. "You were mine the moment you entered these woods." I stumbled down the slope toward the hidden entrance, panting, legs screaming. My fingers tore at the rocks, pulling them aside just enough to slip through. I didn't stop to think. I didn't stop to breathe. The blackness of the cave swallowed me whole as I crawled inside. The familiar stench of damp earth and decay hit my nostrils. My flashlight beam danced wildly against the rock walls as I forced myself deeper. Behind me, I heard her approaching, crawling, scraping, her dislocated limbs twisting unnaturally as she followed. "All of them are still here with me," she crooned from the shadows. "Harvey, Rick, Allison, and soon, you." I reached the inner chamber, the same place where I'd burned the others days before. The scorched remains were still there, charred and crumbling. But now, something new had begun to grow. Tendrils of black vines sprouting from the ashes, pulsating like veins. The creature slithered into the chamber behind me, rising to her full height, an abomination of bone, stretched sinew, and endless teeth. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dark, twin voids of bottomless hunger. "There's nowhere left to run, Oscar," she whispered. I didn't come to run. With shaking hands, I pulled the final card from my pocket, a bundle of flares stolen from my emergency kit at the tower. Her grin faltered. "You think fire can destroy me again?" she snarled. "I've survived your flames once before." I lit the first flare. The red glow burst to life, illuminating the chamber in flickering crimson. Her skin recoiled at the light, sizzling slightly, but she held her ground. "You didn't survive," I said coldly. "You were only wounded. But this time, we both know the truth." I hurled the flare into the nest of blackened remains and growing tendrils. Instantly, the fire caught, racing across the vines like oil. The chamber erupted in flame. The creature shrieked, backing away, smoke curling from her limbs as the fire spread rapidly. "You can't," she howled. I lit the second flare and hurled it closer to her feet. She screamed again, her voice cracking into a dozen distorted frequencies like a chorus of the damned. The heat was unbearable now, sweat pouring off me even as my skin began to blister. The walls trembled as the cave filled with smoke. Burning debris rained down from the ceiling. Cracks spiderwebbed through the rock. The whole cavern was collapsing. The creature lunged one last time, blinded by rage and panic. But I was already diving toward the exit tunnel, crawling desperately through the narrow shaft. The heat chased after me like a living thing. Behind me, her final scream filled the collapsing chamber. "Oscar!" The tunnel mouth caved in just as I tumbled out into the open air. I lay on my back, gasping, staring at the sky above. Black smoke billowed from the ground behind me, rising into the early dawn. My entire body ached, my lungs burned, but I was alive. For now. Hours passed before I dared move. The woods remained quiet. Nothing pursued me. No shadows slithered in the trees, no whispers in my ear. The curse, it seemed, was broken. Weeks later, back in my apartment hundreds of miles away, I still woke up sweating, hearing echoes of her voice, but the woods were far behind me now. The tower, the rules, the games, all gone. At least, that's what I told myself. Until one morning when I checked my mailbox. Inside was a plain envelope, no return address. Inside it, a note written in neat, delicate handwriting. "There's always a Rule 11. Thank you for staying with us through this chilling journey into the forgotten woods and the cursed rules that bind them." The 11th Rule was not just a tale of survival, but a reminder that some truths are better left buried, and some rules exist for reasons far darker than we can imagine. We want to give our deepest gratitude to all our listeners, viewers, and supporters who continue to embrace these unsettling stories. Your passion for the eerie, the unknown, and the terrifying keeps this channel alive. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with fellow horror enthusiasts. And remember, the next time someone hands you a list of rules, read them carefully, because you never know which rule is waiting just for you. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and beware of the things that watch from the dark.